All right, welcome to Role Play Cafe. It's Dell again. I wanted to jump on here really quick and try to make it a quick video. First of all, I want to say I just watched what you put up, Jason, in response to my video to Robert. And of course, man, I mean, you always know that brilliantly. I loved what you were having to say. I was going into the comments to respond to something, and I've got it up on my phone right now. What I saw, what Matthew Kirkhart had said. He was trying to follow along with what you were saying. And I guess I wanted to go ahead and do a video point because I think what he is understanding it to be here is important that we point out what it is not and what it is, and what we're trying to make. First of all, he says, trying to follow you here. It seems like an important difference is that in a traditional way of we have done this, usually the encounter is either there or not there before the players do anything. The encounter is a priori, in other words, well, yeah, I mean, the encounter is there, is empirically verified. It's set there in stone, and then everybody moves around it, so to speak. And then he continues to say, and what I think you're getting at is that the encounter is not necessarily there a priori. Yeah, it's not necessarily, it's contingent. It's it's contingent on we're all finding out. It's all being evolved. It's not that it wasn't ever there. It was just we never empirically verified it until it becomes part of the fiction. So it's not like the GM set it there as traditionally stated, and then we find out. It's just, is there now? There are things in Dark Age of Man where there's like, even our map is more of a Pendragon map. We know where the areas are, and the rest can be filled in. Now, I'll touch on that in a minute here. He says, I think you're getting at the encounter is not necessarily there a priori. It occurs because of some player action, meaning either a traditional player or GM. So the Romulan is an example. So the Romulan ship off the port side is not there in the adventure until the PC fails a scan check or the GM decides to spend a threat resource and make it so. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Funny. Love it. Anyway, I get it. Yes. In effect, there are things. It's not just limited to that, though. Those do play aspects in there as far as like filling a role, which Jason did mention in his video. In Dark Age of Man, when we're doing it specifically to us, that's how we interpret things. Well, filled role always means that there are ramifications. There's a change of situations to where you're not necessarily, it's not in your favor. Okay. However, that is interpreted and implied by the presenter, which is all has to be weighed in by various factors in the moment and in the relevant histories of what has occurred up to that time. So all of that factors in. And that's what Jason said, you're engaged in the moment whenever you're putting and connecting the dots. And that's what I love about doing the Dark Age of Man thing, because I don't know. We have to make sense of all this. And there is a rationale. And that's when you use your a priori, your deductive reasoning to connect all the dots. Like I was mentioning, I think earlier in my video about the synapses all connecting. It's wild when you're there. Okay, so that's the naive aspect of the presenter. When you're sitting there and you're having to present the world, and the world is becoming becoming more clear for you and for them. You are, as presenter, representing the world and the NPCs from a narrative, just as a narrative standpoint. Well, not just, but as a narrative standpoint, as the player would. Everybody's realizing this stuff. You may, as a presenter, outline the world. If it's a specific setting for you, because everybody has to be aware of the world around them. And so there are major key pieces in here. Like even in Dark Age of Man, we put the town of Dredgewater. We have the key, movers and shakers inside of Dredgewater. The town, it lets people kick off from there. Jason, the last game he put us up in was in Ireland, So there had to be some kind of a grounding, so people can feel free to elaborate on, player and presenter, from a rational basis of what can occur. Because when you're making these narrative declarations, you have to feel confident enough. You can't suspend your belief like you're in a world that doesn't work according to, known realities. I mean, water doesn't flow uphill, so we have to have some kind of a rational grounding. That's why we couch the whole setting in something that people would be familiar with. In the Middle Ages and that time, anybody can, I think, kind of find some kind of a home there to make assertions and declarations about the narrative without feeling too out of place. All right, that's one. And then he goes on to say, so the mechanics are a little different, that the player actions rather than, say, the passage of time triggers the encounter, not that different than a wandering monster table. Well, yeah, I mean, as far as the random seed generator, these things, when you roll them, they're triggered. And when you automatically, now there's from experience, when you look down there and you roll that number and you say, this is happening, you're going to make sense of it inside the world. It's going to be apparent. It will connect. And if it doesn't immediately, that it's sitting there simmering in the back of your mind, whether or not it's in their immediate, you know, in their immediate vicinity, or either around the corner or over here that they don't see, that has some kind of a effect overall. Like when I roll plague, like in my earlier example, how is it going to play out? How did it most appropriately, where would the bearing lie inside the game? Did I need initially somebody to stumble up on top of them with the plague, or how was it going to play out? So I had to interpret that in the game with what made sense at the time. It had to be applied then. And it always weighs in and affects, like I said, the relevant histories of everything that's going. It's just another thing that complicates and adds another layer on top of what's going down. All right. So it deepens the satisfaction, in my estimation. All right. What is most different is, if I am understanding, and I'm reading from his post, if I'm understanding your points here, is that much of the adventure is created spontaneously by all players. I'm going to hold off on that for a second. Your desire to make the GM more like a PC player seems to be an important part of this, to essentially increase the level of the unknown for the GM so that it is at least approaches the level of the unknown for the PC players, which obviously is quite high. And that is important. I think some of the misconception of what people's mind would rightly maybe go to is more of like a cooperative, communally, in other words, a mindset to where everybody's a GM. And this isn't so. What we're doing is I just don't want that to be misconstrued as that's what we're doing here. I don't want it to look at like everybody's a GM, everybody has narrative agency to where they can make something, they can manifest or bring something into the world. Now, they can. And this is where Jason touched on the fact that, where's that line? Where do we draw it? And essentially what the deal is whenever the presenter lays out a skeletal situation, this is the situation. The players can have liberty when they're at the table to fill in the details. And there is a mutual trust and respect around the table. Nobody wants to be that guy to make others suspend their belief. Everybody falls in line, and really kind of naturally in everything that we've played in all of our practices, everybody falls in step with that. Like I said, Jason, nobody wants to be the guy at the table that farts. Nobody's going to do that. So you're going to add the details. If I say there, you come up to a wall, you can add within reasonable, plausible levels, some level of detail to that wall in your narrative description. I always refer to it as narrating within arm's length. So that's essentially what the player character does, is add details, fleshes out that skeleton, and then it goes from there. Now, he's not, as a player, you can't jump inside and steer that NPC and talk for it and move it to where it goes. You can interact with it, you can handshake with it, you can whatever you want to a certain degree, but I think that's kind of unspoken and known. intuitively known on a level to where you know when you're overstepping your boundaries. So it's that give and take, and it's that flow. Trust is very much a part of it. But when you get to rolling on that, everybody falls in line and falls together. It's the same way when we don't have initiative. Everybody, you do it. You yield to the other person. You know when you're about to step over the line. You know where your boundaries are for what you are inside this world. This is what's been evidenced in our play, in our play test. So the thing is not to make everybody a GM and not to take these bennies, so to speak, or the doom and threat, which Jason made an excellent point that essentially what we're doing with that is it's just a different way. It's been throughout the ages of random age. All of this could be, yeah, we're doing the same thing, but it's a little bit different here. But what we're trying to do is use it in a way that facilitates player agency more so. It doesn't impede or get in the way of player agency by making it procedurally that you have to do this and that, whatever. Everybody relies on the social contract and social etiquette to not step on each other's toes. It's a dance, and you roll with it narratively, and you don't upset the apple cart. And even worst case scenario, the presenter will let you know if you step over the line, and he can veto what is there. When something is not so, or either through a narrative declaration on his own part, say that it was misconstrued on your side, or either roll a die, whatever is appropriate and whatever seems appropriate at the time to apply to that moment to counterbalance and to ease things back in. And in that example, when we was playing with Derek, there was definitely, like Jason stated, it was 40 years, and then that kind of, he had to sit back and go, what is he driving at here? Because Derek had put his toe over the line when he narrated that and said what the Viking had did, even though it was plausibly reasonable that a Viking would do that. And Jason didn't stop it, but he thought it was interesting enough to run with it. That was the furthest we're looking at. You're buffing it up right up against there, and you play. But there's nothing wrong. This is the same way as a player. Whenever I walk up to a wall and I say, walk up to a door, and then he says, there's a door there. Typically, I might say, what does it look like? Well, it's a wooden door with bands on it. There's this and that and this and that. Why do those details necessarily have to be handled by a GM or in our game a presenter? Whenever I, as a player, can say, I come up to the door instead of the narrative break and the immersive break. And I can say, I'm feeling along the wooden, to find this or that. And the bands are, and I describe it, because 9 times out of 10, you know what I'm saying? If there's some kind of a thing that he has to stop you, or, well, yeah, it'll be counterbalanced. The presenter will counterbalance you. But whenever that presenter says, if he doesn't make some kind of a declaration at the onset in his skeletal description of what's going on there, as a keep away, no, like, actually, you come up to a castle with, some kind of or there's a moat around the castle. Now, a player can maybe assume that there's a moat if it's a castle and roll up there, or he can say it's not, or he can kind of fill in the details. If it's more so key and critical to what is going on there, or what needs to be stated, the presenter can say it if it's necessary, if it's inside of the seed that needs to be there. Otherwise, it's flexible and it can rotate, and then whenever stuff is stated, it becomes a part of the overall narrative and in the community. Whenever we're sitting there at the table, everybody's alive, everybody's aware. Whenever things are stated, you're involved in it. You're noting it mentally. You're not checked out looking at your freaking phone or doing whatever like that. You're waiting for your response. I said, there's no initiative. You say what you say, yielding to the other, but you go in whenever you got to do it. Well, this is what I'm doing when he's doing it. And you narrate in this upcoming game. I'm playing more of a stoic character that I have to reel myself in. I'm not going to be using a lot of dialogue to make my declarative narration or my intent. I have to do that through my narrative description of my actions more so than I would my dialogue, with my intent to lay it out. The details are important. They're important on both sides. The presenter needs to lay out at least a level of detail that is pertinent to the situation, and the players can play off of that and fill in the details inside of their narrative agency in doing that. The key point, Jason pointed this out the other day when we were talking about, as far as it being conceived of a game where it's a communal DM, where I know, Matthew, you stated in your other comment on there about the other game, where everybody was basically a DM and a player, and they could use points to bring something into the narrative. It's not that way in Dark Age of. It's no shared GMing. The presenter is naive to what the potentiality that is held inside of the momentum that we're all moving toward. He weaves in, connects the dots of what has been brought up in the random seed, applies it with enough information that the players can flesh out in detail and keep the narrative going. And like I said, it builds, and there's layers to it, and there's relevant histories to where you have to play off of and you have to remember, but it's not a problem because everybody's engaged at the table and everybody remembers these little incidences and how they apply, even subconsciously. Like Jason noted the other day that Eric had mentioned about something that Brian had said earlier, later on down the road when we got to Rising. We were all there. It was happening. His character was privy to that information. So he made he made a logical deduction of why something was that we were going up to Rising, because Brian was trying to reestablish the 10 trade with that city. And Eric said, no wonder there's no, Jason had said that there was no, there wasn't much commerce there, basically, because of what else he had rolled that weighed in on how Rising would appear when we got there. And then Eric's character said, makes perfect sense. This is why we're not seeing blacksmith. Well, he was playing a blacksmith from the other town. This is why we're not seeing that. So everybody throws that hot potato back and forth and continues and builds upon the narrative and the histories, and it just goes. Okay, the presenter will represent the world, and the NPCs and the players are responsible for representing the players. He's not taking a GM stance. He's not representing the world or anything like that. He is fleshing out the details, because no matter what anybody says, when you read a book, David Gilmour, one of my favorite authors, high fantasy. If you've never read him, definitely recommend him. He said, when you're writing, you don't need to fill out every detail like that, because the reader will automatically fill in all the details. You give them about 3 things that are pertinently relevant to the situation, and then you roll with that and let them, they're going to immediately in their mind's eye populate what is there. So that's all we're allowing to do, is allowing the players to do this, to have the ability to do that, to facilitate natural narrative, conversational play at the table that just rolls and isn't stagnated by anything. And it's a wonderful experience. It's a wonderful experience, man. So in that regard, it is not a communal GM type thing to where we're passing beanies back and forth and leveraging it. Jason did make a very solid point in his video that where it may seem like we are just making it up as we go along. Now, from a presenter point of view, as far as from that point of view, what he was referencing, whenever we roll something, we have to interpret what that role is. And we're at that moment have to understand that something in the world that is related to what that sentence or that word or whatever's on that random seed that was just pulled up, how does it affect and where would it affect that? So that's what you're engaged in as a presenter, as presenting this information. You got this new information, this new file that just dropped in your lap. How do I apply this? And you have to do it. You have to keep that integrity of the world plausible and real, and connect the dots, make sense, justify why it is there. Otherwise, it's just like I said on the other videos, it's like when somebody tells a lie, you know when they're telling a lie, and they know you just lied. So you really, there's a dynamic there to where there's a trust at the table, and nobody breaks that trust with each other. They stay in their character space. The integrity of their character space is important. They respond that way. They represent their character. They're in a mindset and interacting with the world. And the presenter is doing on the other side, he's interacting with the players in the same way, in the same regard, just from the position of the NPCs in the world and how the world itself resist and push back based on rationality. So anyway, I'm gonna stop talking. Even this mind-bending background is making me dizzy. But anyway, great question, great comments on there. Glad to see it. And Jason, you did a fantastic job, man. I watched it like twice. And I saw Matthew's comments, so wanted to jump on here and say that real quick. Otherwise, you guys have a great night. All right. All right.